Many say that you really haven't lived until you've owned a Porsche 911, but with so many of them on the road and so many different generations, which one is the best one for you? I dig into most of the Porsche 911s for sale today. That includes air-cooled 911s and the water-cooled 911s, including the Porsche 996, 997, 991, and finally the latest Porsche 992. I can tell you I love them all. However, they each have their pros and cons. And so owning a Porsche 911 might be your childhood dream, but you need to know exactly what you're getting into so that it does not turn into your childhood nightmare as an adult.
What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to
11, exactly.
So if you think that owning a Porsche 911 might be in your future, don't forget to like and subscribe because we've got a lot more Porsche videos coming up really soon. And so in no particular order, let's start with the... Yes, let's start with the 997.
Come a little closer. Ask anybody in the street which one you think is newer, and you're going to get answers that you might not expect. Let's just say the answers will be way off. And that's how you know that Porsche did an incredible job with the Porsche 997. In this video, I'm going to cover the Porsche 997, why it's so popular, what to look for, and if it's worth the expense. And don't forget to do all the YouTube stuff. Like, subscribe, and I forgot what was the other one. And share. It really does help out the channel. Let's go. Why do so many people think the 997 is the best modern 911? Just look at it. This is the most Porsche looking modern Porsche that Porsche has ever made. From every single corner, it screams Porsche. It looks like a 959 from the front and a proper 911 from the rear. Now, it's interesting that this car is almost exactly the same car as the Porsche 996. Yet, a lot of people love the 997 but hate the 996. And it's essentially the same car. Yes, it's upgraded, but those headlights are what truly have made this car a favorite of so many. It looks like an older 911 and like a newer 911. So driving down the street with this car, you really can't tell how old it is whatsoever. And I think that my favorite part as far as looks is the rear slope. The rear slope on the 997 is a proper 911. You see how the slope goes all the way down past the belt line into the bumper? That's exactly what a 911 should be. It just looks extra aggressive, extra 911. Now, when I talk about looks, it's interesting because you see this car in pictures and it looks a lot bigger than the earlier air-cooled 911s. But this is one of the best things about the Porsche 997. It is sports car size, so no extra fat, just the perfect dimensions. So this compact size adds to its driver feel. Now, remember that the newer ones got a lot bigger in the outside, but they did not get a lot bigger in the inside. Now, when looking at Porsche 997, unlike the earlier air-cooled 911s, you actually have to be a lot more careful because a lot of what to look for is totally hidden. So I'm gonna go down the list of the few things to look for on a 997 and the ones that feel like red flags but they're really not. Oil leaks. 997s leak oil, but the oil leaks are nothing like they were with the earlier air-cooled cars. The earlier air-cooled cars leaked so much oil that the smell that they give is part of the car's essence, which I kind of like, that kind of oil and rubber mixed smell. I love it. But on 997s, on a hot engine cover, when you put it up, you should not smell any oil whatsoever. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that when they look under a 997, it usually looks perfect because those plastic panels that are on the car, they hide a multiple of sins. They hide dents in the chassis, overspray from a repainted car, and oil running completely under the entire car. A lot of them actually don't have under trays anymore. A lot of people just leave them off. But if they're missing, it's a huge indication of how much the owner cares about the car. If he didn't bother to put it back on, it's a red flag, and it means that the car needs extra inspection. Moving on to the next one. One of the ones that everybody loves to talk about is a bore scoring. Now, bore scoring on the M96 and M97 engines is very rare. It's also rare on the newer DFI motor. But you know how the internet is. The first red flag is a blackened tailpipe, usually on the driver's side. But if the car was detailed by a dealer, chances are that you won't see it there. The easiest way to find out if the car has bore scoring or anything that could be like that is to get a little bore scope just like this, and it's so simple, even a baby could do it. You pull out the spark plugs and you stick the little camera down the cylinder wall. A lot of them you could even see it on your phone. It's not a complicated thing. Now, a thing about bore scoring. I've seen cars with bore scoring that they keep driving. Year after year, nothing happens. The engine hasn't blown up, the owner's enjoying it, the owner's tracking it, the owner's going to events, they just keep driving. It's not a big deal. So eventually something's gonna happen to the motor, but 99.999% of the rebuilds that I'm seeing from bore scoring are with bore scoring that are very light. The car was driving perfectly and the mechanic recommended to have a full engine rebuild to get it addressed. Now, in most cases, the owner could have kept on driving for years. You will hear a ticking sound if there's issues with the bore scoring. You will hear it. Most owners are rebuilding these engines in a panic when the mechanic says, listen, your engine's bad and you need to go ahead and get it rebuilt. It's a tough call, especially because I know a lot of Porsche 997s that have bore scoring and they're daily drivers. Most people are doing full engine rebuilds when they see a little line in the cylinder walls. It's ridiculous. Moving on to the next point. With the Porsche 997, there's so much BS on the internet that owners and would-be owners are constantly looking or hearing for any little tick, any little sound that could be like the engine exploding or something. But there is something that can cause concern on the 997.2 with the newer engine. You see, what most people read is that car does not have the IMS, but that car is a DFI motor, direct fuel injection.
Direct injection, which is really stupid because it clogs up the intake so bad that you have to pull it apart and clean it.
And most people are surprised to learn that direct fuel injection has like a tick at idle. Like a And it's not just the 997, it's all direct fuel injected cars. It's just that a lot of cars have a lot of insulation with the plastic covers to quiet down that sound. The 997 doesn't have that, so you can actually hear it from the outside when the car is idling. It's completely normal. That's just how the fuel injection is in that car. A lot of owners worry that the car is ticking because of bore scoring, and it's just the fuel injectors. If the injectors on that car are too loud, a solid exhaust system fixes most problems. It's a non-issue. On to the next point. One of the great things about the Porsche 997s is that the owners baby these cars. So it's very rare that you're gonna find a Porsche 997s with Falcon tires or with mismatched tires all the way around. What that also means is that a lot of owners are throwing too much money into these cars. What do I mean? Full body paint protection films. Now, I get it. These paint protection films can be good if you're gonna be daily driving the car. It kind of saves the paint. Only a little bit, by the way. So I wouldn't pay a premium for any car that's had paint protection film. You want to keep your paint perfect, keep the car in a garage. That does more than any paint protection film ever will. Moving on to the next one. Battery draining. These cars all drain battery. Now you can put a battery cutoff on it, which a lot of people don't. The best thing you do is put a battery tender on it. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that if you don't put a battery tender on the Porsche 997, if the car has been parked for a month and the car starts, so basically the battery didn't drain, the battery is actually at a lowered state and you are going to get a lot of warning signs because a lot of sensors are not going to fully fire up and those error codes stay in the computer and you're chasing gremlins that don't exist. Make sure that car gets started up every 2 weeks. Otherwise, you might definitely get warning signs. And then the worst thing that you could do is go take it to a mechanic where for sure he's going to help you find something. And all it was is just a battery that is going. Now, this is not 997 specifically. The same thing happens with the Porsche 928, perhaps even more. A lot of people just go ahead and put battery cutoffs on that just to not deal with it. Moving on to the next point. One of the good things about the Porsche 997 is that it's OBD2. Now for guys that like older classics, OBD2 is like, whoa, you just stick the little scanner, it actually tells you what's wrong with it. So this is great for a lot of different reasons. But with the Porsche 997, OBD2 is not a way to see what the codes are in the car. You actually have to take it to a tech where they have a professional scanner that can tell you everything about the car. There's a lot of cars that are driving perfect, but they have been over revved 12, 20, 30 times. And guess what? All that information is there, recorded on the DME, which is great. You actually find out more on a PPI than most earlier Porsches, just because they put it in the scanner and you cannot hide anything. Another great thing is that the miles are recorded on there. So unlike early Porsches, which in many cases the miles are because it's so easy to change the miles on those cars, on the newer 996 and 997s, everything is recorded in the computer. So on the Porsche 997 specifically, a pre-purchase inspection and a set of records is super important, just because you can't tell on that car just by looking at it. The best bet is to find a trusted mechanic that you know, develop a relationship before buying the car, because these cars are getting to such an age now that even if it was running perfect, it's gonna start having maintenance things that need to get done to it. Now, why is that so important? Because usually trouble cars are always trouble trouble cars. And cars that never give trouble usually never give trouble. So for example, if a car doesn't have bore scoring at 90,000 miles, guess what? It's probably never gonna have bore scoring. If a car doesn't have IMS issues at 90,000 miles, guess what? It's probably never gonna have IMS issues. Now, as far as the deals, I've learned with 997s, what you're really shopping for is condition. You're shopping for the history of a car and if the car has been abused or neglected. One thing is 100% sure with the 997. Whatever you buy this car for, jump 3-4 years and you're gonna sell it for more. So in a way, it's less expensive than buying a new minivan that drops half its value in 2-3 years. So that's why it's super important to get a 997 in the best condition possible. Because if you do happen to sell the car, and most people actually do eventually, because we're not on this planet forever, whatever money you put into that car, you put it right back out. So resale is a huge part of the 997's appeal. It sells fast and the prices keep going up. They haven't achieved 993 levels yet, but a lot of people are already saying that the 997 is the next 993. And judging by the way that the prices keep going up, it's entirely possible. So it makes no sense to try to get a deal on a Porsche 997 because that deal is going to cost you more when you go ahead and you resell that car. So on a Porsche 997, it's okay to splurge, to spend just a little bit more on the one that you really like, because at the end of the day, you'll always get your money back on that car. So are you really splurging or are you being smart? So that's the way that I feel about the Porsche 997.
Porsche 911 996. Let me start by saying that Porsche would love to have another 996 now. On this video, I'm going to explain the market on this car and the prices, why they are what they are. Let's look at the actual car versus the market first. When the 996 came out, the 996 was bigger than the 993, but it was lighter. It wasn't just bigger, it was also faster, lighter, and most importantly, the structure was stiffer, a lot stiffer. As a matter of fact, the handling advantages of the 996 versus the 993 come from the increased wheelbase and, most importantly, the stiffer structure. The structure of the 996 is essentially the same one in the 997. They are essentially the same car. The 997 is a refined 996. You wouldn't know that by looking at these used car prices. Let's see what's going on. Looking at the car as far as the quality of the car, 996 versus a car replaced the Porsche 993. Well, I've got some thoughts on it that are very different than anything that you read online. These cars are all getting old now. So basically, every single one of these used cars are going to need some kind of restoration unless you're buying them in low mile, unbelievable condition. So the first thought that comes up with any classic car is restoration. What are you going to do to the car? And most importantly, how has the car held up over time? How has the car held up? Has it disintegrated in the elements in the weather, or is it holding up? It's a true test of the quality of the car. Let's look at some specifics. Earlier air-cooled 911s versus this newer 996. Let's start with the interiors. That seems to be the main complaint about the Porsche 996, that the interiors are very plastically and just not up to the same quality of the earlier air-cooled 911. That is BS with a few asterisks. Let me explain this one. The dashboard on the earlier air-cooled 911s all cracked eventually. It uses the same material that the Porsche 944 used and 968 and the Porsche 928. Give it enough time and parked outside in the sun, those dashboards crack. 996s? Nope. Those plastic dashboards on the 996s, even though the rake on the windshield is far more, so it gets more sun, they do not crack. As a matter of fact, if you look up online, comparing the price of a 996 dashboard versus a 993 dashboard, it's night and day. And the only ones that do go bad are the leather wrapped ones, but every single other leather wrapped dashboard goes bad. It's not a symptom of the quality of the dashboard, it's just the leather. So as far as the plastics in the earlier 911s versus the later 996 generations, if we're going to measure perceived versus actual quality is actually higher in the 996's plastics versus the earlier air-cooled 911 cars. So why the outrage on the 996's interior? Well, there's just more plastic than there was in the earlier cars. Plastic is not good at the end of the day. Nobody wants plastic in their cars, which that all changed, by the way, in the Porsche 996 Turbo. Those came with standard leather wrap dashboard. You sit in a 996 Turbo versus a standard Carrera and you'll see the difference. But the standard ones are fantastic because they last far better than the earlier air-cooled 911 dashboards, 928 dashboards, 944 dashboards, and 968 dashboards, and of course the 924. Let's look at the rest of the interior, what it would cost to restore a 996 versus an earlier car. The seats. If you gotta replace worn leather on a Porsche 996's interior, you can pick from 996 seats, Boxster seats, and the newer generation 997 seats. They bolt on. Another thing that these cars suffered from, as a matter of fact, a lot of BMWs too, BMWs, Ferraris, Aston Martins, are sticky buttons on radios like this. This radio is a standard radio that came in most 996s and 986s, the Becker unit. What's the biggest complaint about these radios? That they're not up to the same quality quality of the earlier ones, the buttons. You wipe them down with alcohol and put them back. You don't have to worry about it again. Yet when you sit inside the car, you go to turn on the radio, your impression is of a sticky interior just because you touched this little thing. Ridiculous. I would be far more concerned about a cracked dashboard or seats that are super expensive to repair than little plastic parts. This is not the argument that you're going to find anywhere when you talk about this car. The first thing you're going to hear is that the interior is not up to the same level as before. Let's move on to the body. You don't have to worry about rust with anything from the 996 and up, unless it's been crashed and improperly repaired. Rust is just not a big factor in the body of these newer cars. These cars are not getting younger, they're getting older, and rust, it starts becoming a main concern. You don't have to worry about any of that with the Porsche 996 and up. It's something less of a headache. The body is as good as it gets and as good as Porsche has made. The cost to restore these cars are far less than the earlier air-cooled 911s, but the perception of lower quality sticks around like it never goes away. It's ridiculous. Now, living in Miami has definitely affected how I feel about cars in general. What happened here is very similar to what happened all over the world when the Porsche 996 came out. Remember that Porsche replaced the freshly restyled 993 with the 996. The 993 was only about 3 years old when the 996 came out, and the 996 completely outsold that car for its entire generation. And that unbelievable amount of success for Porsche is the 996's biggest problem today. Let's see exactly how successful that car was. For comparison purposes, let's compare the Porsche 996 to other Porsches. The Porsche 928 from 1977 to 1995 sold only 61,000 cars all over the world. That was it. The other cross shop that you would have is the Porsche 993. Well, the Porsche 993 from 1993 to 98, they sold 68,000 cars. 68,000 cars. Guess how many Porsche 996s Porsche sold from 98 to 2005? It sold 175,000 cars. That is even more cars than the 944 sold from 1982 to 1991. They did 163,000 cars. And that was supposed to be the entry-level Porsche. This more expensive 996 outsold all of those. Controversial? I don't think so. If it would have been so controversial, it would not have sold in the numbers that have sold. If Porsche was giving a bargain, if Porsche was giving a deal, well, then perhaps that could be controversial and outsold. But no, it didn't. They were charging full prices for these cars plus add-ons. And so the market was flooded with these cars. Now, it's easy to forget how many of these cars were sold if you look at options like this. You see a series of 996 cars, a series of 993, 997 cars right next to it, and you think, why is the 996 so much less expensive? If you see these sales, you're only seeing a static picture of what has sold. You're not seeing the backlog, a huge pool of cars that are coming in and out of the market all the time. And bring a trailer. In the same amount of time that the 993 sold about 500 cars, almost 900 996s were sold. That doesn't even begin to give you an entire picture of all the other cars that are selling in the used car market. Because remember, bring a trailer is just a very small niche. That is the biggest reason that these cars' prices are a deal. It is simple supply and demand. The more cars on the market, the price goes down. It was Porsche's most successful Porsche 911. It is a victim of its own success. There is more of these cars available now to purchase than 993s, 997s, 928s, 968s for sure. And so the prices haven't climbed how they have with these other cars. It's got nothing to do with the styling of these cars, with the headlights. It's got nothing to do with that. If that were true, the 996 GT3 and 996 Turbo will be selling for peanuts. They're not. Those cars sell at a premium, even with the headlights. These headlights are already becoming cool. The simplicity, it's pure classic Porsche.
No one ever says a bad word about these style headlights when they're on a GT1.
The good thing about these cars is that the prices have already stabilized. As a matter of fact, the prices are actually going up. High quality condition 996s are selling already for more than higher mileage 997s. They're essentially the same car. The engines cost about the same that it costs air-cooled 911s to rebuild. The interiors are cheaper to redo, and the body, you don't have to worry so much about rust with these cars versus the earlier 911s. It's a win-win for these cars. Now, if you're looking to flip it for double or triple, like some other used car classic, you might be out of luck with this car. But if you're looking to buy it and hold on for a while, enjoy it in the meantime, this definitely is the car for you.
Imagine a machine that roars to life, a machine that completely defies limits, and a legacy that races through time, all encapsulated in the ferocious Porsche 991. Welcome, fellow thrill seekers, to the world where curves and straightaways become your canvas, and the Porsche 991 is your paintbrush. Inside the cockpit, you're not just a driver, you are a warrior, a commander of torque and horsepower. Almost perfect? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover the Porsche 911 991, years 2011 to 2019. If you are a buyer or you already own a Porsche 911, this video is for you. Whoa! But first, enough with the window shopping. Hit the like and subscribe button. It signals the algorithm to push this video out to more Porsche enthusiasts. Let's go. Most Porsche 911s now are coming out of warranty. And so one of the biggest questions that most people possibly have to themselves is it reliable? Well, if we're looking at the engine and transmission, they have already proven to be rock solid. How rock solid? The 9A1 engine in the Porsche 991 is the same engine that is in the Porsche 997.2. And guess what? The 997.2s go for a huge premium. And the main reason that they go for a premium is because of that engine. Knowing a lot of Porsche shop owners here in Miami, universally, every single one of them praises the Porsche 991. It's the most trouble-free 911 that Porsche has ever made. I know a lot of 997.2s with over 200,000 miles, and they are daily driven and they are perfect. So if that's any indication of the mechanicals of these cars, they are a go. Except for a couple little things that are not really engine related, they're accessory related. For example, the water pump can give issues. Some people have had to replace them at 30,000 miles, some at 40,000 miles, and some never. But I wouldn't consider that engine related. Even though it's attached to the engine, those are accessories, and they're also maintenance items. You're gonna have to replace the water pump anyways eventually, and they're not that expensive. The only thing bad about the Porsche 991's engine is that you can't see it, but you can definitely hear it. The Porsche 991 is a very, very different car than any earlier Porsche 911. It's far more comfortable and far more daily drivable than earlier cars, to the point where on the highway, with the suspension softened up and the exhaust toned down, it's a cruiser. You can definitely do 500-600 miles per day on a Porsche 991, which is very similar to the Porsche 928, by the way. So I can see where the comparisons come from. But long distance comfort is where the similarities end. The Porsche 991 is as hardcore as it gets, and as a matter of fact, it's a lot sharper than virtually every single earlier 911 except for the GT cars. So it is most definitely not a Grand Tourer. So the dual nature of the Porsche 991 means that more people are looking at this Porsche 911 than virtually any other Porsche 911 in its history, and it's been very popular for Porsche. But it's not just that the car is more accessible. It's not that at all. There are huge advancements in the Porsche 991s that you do not see just by looking at it. The structure on the Porsche 991 is completely different than the 997s. This structure is bigger but also lighter and stiffer, an ultra rare thing in cars today where everything keeps getting more and more bloated. That didn't happen with the 991. It actually got lighter, stiffer, and yes, a little bit bigger, mainly in the track for better handling and stability. So the structures of these Porsche 991s are rock solid. And I can see the structure of these Porsche 991s outlasting the owners easily. And that's what you have in the Porsche 991, a Porsche that's gonna last several decades. Interiors. This is something that has been universally praised on the Porsche 991. The quality of the materials in the interior. Now, there is a big difference between perceived quality and actual quality, because plastic is plastic. But what is far more impressive in the Porsche 991 is the leather interiors, because usually leather interiors are a liability for the second or third or fourth owner. Leather interiors, specifically leather dashboards, look great for a couple years until inevitably the leather starts shrinking, it starts warping, and the interior starts looking like a mess. And this happens with most manufacturers that have full leather interiors. But this is not happening with the Porsche 991. Leather's leather, right? Wait till you see this. Usually, when you have leather bonded to plastic, one of two things happens. The leather shrinks, and the adhesive that is connecting it to the plastic is not strong enough to hold the actual leather, and so the leather pulls away. The other thing is the actual adhesive itself, the glue, breaks down and loses all its strength. It's not just the heat. You see, when the plastics heat up, they gas out, and those gases, the new car smell, start breaking down the glue. And so every single manufacturer is bonding their leathers directly to that plastic. So what did Porsche do? They removed all the plastic on these 991 dashboards. It looks like this. There is just the EVA foam and the leather directly mounted to the top. This is how custom hot rods are built out in California, and it's usually not cheap. So with the Porsche 991 specifically, full leather interiors are totally worth it. So this new method of construction is the reason that the leather dashboards on the Porsche 991s are holding up a whole lot better than anything that came before it. Now, it's not all perfect. The door panels warp in the heat. Now, if you're coming from a classic Porsche and you see this, you're like, who cares? But if you've never done any kind of restoration, once you see the door panel separating, it can be a little bit alarming and it might make you think that there's something wrong with the car. This can easily be fixed with some glue, a heat gun, and a couple clamps. It's not a big deal. It's kind of like first world problems, considering what you're getting with the Porsche 991. Size versus the earlier Porsche 911s. Another reason why Porsche enthusiasts say that 991 is more of a tourer is because it's grown and is so much bigger than the earlier 911s. Hold on just a second. It's only a few inches bigger. It's still a very small car. For comparison, I think that we all can agree that the Porsche 993 is a tiny car, not that much bigger. And we also can agree that the Porsche 997 is also a very small car. You see, the reason the Porsche 991 looks bigger is mainly because of the higher belt line that also spans into the rear bumper, makes it look a lot bigger than what it really is. So the optical illusion of the raised belt line and the lower roof does make it look a lot bigger if it's by itself. But the moment that you park it next to any other car, you see the Porsche 991 is still the size of a real sports car. Ceramic versus steel brakes. When you search ceramic brakes online, you're gonna get two polar opposite opinions. Some people say it's worth it, and some people say the braking is worse in the cold, and some people have sold their cars because of the ceramic brakes. This is crazy. Most of the ceramic brakes that I've seen that drive not so good, as in the car really doesn't have brake feel when it's cold, is because it doesn't have the OEM pads. Usually, somewhere along the line, the pads were changed, and the brakes don't feel quite right. If the pads are brand new, it should have better bite when it's cold and much better bite when it's hot. Now there is this middle in the modulation that they can feel very different than the steel brakes. That's why the steel brakes are so popular. And so what a lot of people have done is change the brake pads to a different compound that is more drivable on the street. And that's exactly what I would do if I had the ceramics. These packaged brake pads, they're far easier to drive on the streets, especially if you don't know what kind of brake pads are even on your car. Instead of giving up on them, try these brake pads. They should help a lot. And of course, bleed the brakes. A lot of people forget that. Now, the other thing that I've heard is that ceramic brakes can be a little bit noisy. And yes, that's true. It's just the harmonics of the brakes. There's nothing wrong with them. That's just the way that they are. They're basically racing brakes for the streets. So when the Porsche 991 came out, it was an NA motor, so naturally aspirated motor. With the 991.2, all 911s became turbocharged. Now you would think that that's a great thing because throughout the history, the Porsche 911 Turbo has been the king of the hill. But believe it or not, there's actually mixed opinions about turbos being standard on all Porsche 911s. Well, it's very simple. The turbos act basically as a muffler, and it changes the sound of the Porsche 911's engine. But there are a lot of advantages to the 991.2, specifically power. On paper, it looks like you're getting only a little bump in power, but what you're really getting is a lot of torque. So the engine is a lot more usable in daily driving. The turbos spool up super fast and there's a very little turbo lag. And if you need more power, it's a lot less expensive to tune a turbo engine than a naturally aspirated engine, because you can easily up the boost with a simple tune and get an extra 100 horsepower. You don't even have that option on the naturally aspirated engine in the 991.1, and a version of the engine keeps on living in the new Porsche 992. CarPlay is still kind of laggy, to be honest with you, so I don't even count that. The real reason to get a 991.2 is the rear steering. That rear steering makes a 991 drive a lot smaller than the earlier models that don't have the rear steering. What it essentially does is make the car feel like it has a shorter wheelbase. That's what everybody has always loved about the Porsche 911, its short wheelbase. And not just because it's smaller, but because when you have a short wheelbase, everything feels more immediate. And so by Porsche doing this kind of wizardry and creating this rear wheel steering, the car feels a lot more immediate when you're turning on the highway, when you're hitting a bank, or in a parking lot. That one thing has made the electronic steering on the newer generation 991s a pleasure to have. It'll never have the feel of a hydraulic steering, but it's so much more precise with the rear steering that it makes it almost worth it. Almost. I still prefer the hydraulic steering on the older Porsches. The best thing is that it is such an advanced car and it hides it all underneath its incredible bodywork. Nobody will suspect the amount of engineering that has gone into a Porsche 991 if they see it drive by. You only really start seeing the engineering when you drive it and after 30 years pass, that the car is still ticking. We've got one life to live and it's too short to drive boring cars. Find the nicest one you can find and enjoy the extraordinary. The Porsche 911's 992's sculpted curves and roaring engine is not just about having fun. fun. In many cases, it's also about turning a profit, or at the very least, not losing any money. The Porsche 911 is not a normal car, and the values explain this. Think of it as art with a twist. Since I've had Porsche since I was 17 years old, I've seen everything go up and down. I see so many videos online about the depreciation curves, the ups and downs, how the resale of the Porsches are. It kind of makes you think, are these people thinking in terms of days or weeks or months? It does not make any sense. Don't get me wrong, it might make sense for dealers which are flipping cars, but the average enthusiast is looking to buy and hold. If the prices go up and down a couple percentage points in the span of a year, it does not affect most Porsche owners. That being said, it's always good to have an exit strategy. And also, what could be funner than enjoying a car for a period of time and then selling it for more? So in many ways, it's a double the fun. But before we dive in, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Drop a like and let's embark into this journey of fun and a little bit of financial foresight. You've got to remember that everybody who's ever purchased a Porsche 911 brand new has wanted it ever since they were a little kid. It was not an impulse buy. When they were growing up, they had one or two of these. And if they were extra cool, they had a 928. So by the time that they're looking to actually option out the car, they've already had the car in their head for decades, and they're gonna order exactly how they want it. This is one of the advantages of Porsche not changing the design. The car you wanted when you were 5 years old is still the car that you're gonna want when you're 60. So this huge advantage that Porsche has means that almost every kid wants a Porsche 911, but they want it just a little bit different. And that's where the options come in. Porsche knows, exactly like Ferrari, which also puts the options on a plaque in the car, that in the secondary market, the options are what sell a car. So obviously, the limited edition models are usually the ones that automatically start going up. And what I mean by automatically, as in the depreciation curve really does not affect them. These cars are sold at the dealership and usually stored away because they immediately start going up in value. And the moment that any specific model is discontinued, if it's a limited edition, the prices in many cases double. You can option it out any color you want and wrap every single piece of plastic in that car with leather, even the buttons. Now it sounds extravagant, but fast forward 20 years, the cars that are optioned out with crazy colors and crazy options are the ones that command all the headlines. And this trend is only growing. So you might spend an extra $30,000 or $40,000 on options, but if you ever do sell the car in 10, 15, 20 years, you've got something that is so special that everybody's gonna want, and it's gonna be very easy to sell because there's not another one like it on the used car market. And this is the trend that has been happening with Porsche 911s ever since the 80s. It's just getting a lot more now. Beyond the crazy options cars, the one thing that really doesn't cost anything to guarantee that the Porsche 911 992 that you're purchasing maintains its value far higher than all the other ones is going with the manual transmission. And yes, I know that the PDK is far superior than the manual. It's faster and in many cases far more reliable because you really can't miss a shift. But better and faster does not equate a higher resale. Now there's a lot of theories on this. Why would a technically superior car be worth less? A lot's got to do with the perception. Look on the Auto Trader, Cars.com, everywhere. When you see PDK equipped cars, it shows as automatic. It's so much so that Porsche even changed the automatic lever on its GT3 to make it look like if it were a stick shift car. This was the only reason they changed it. So if you don't want to spend a lot on options, but you still want to guarantee that your Porsche maintains a really high resale value, just get the manual. It's really easy to drive. The clutch is super light. It's almost like it's not even there. Believe me. After the warranties expire on the Porsche 992, how is it going to behave? Well, there's already a lot of cars on the road that tell us exactly how it is, because the Porsche 992 has a version of the Porsche 991's engine, which has a version of the Porsche 997.2's engine. Those engines have been very reliable if you keep them stock. If you start boosting them, which is very easy to do by the way, and don't upgrade the cooling system, you're going to have issues like this. And if you're the type of person that likes to take it to the dealership to get it fixed, you're also gonna have issues like this.
$8,830.25 to do this job.
Now, it's not as bad as it sounds. You gotta remember that dealerships make their money with parts and labor in their service department. So this price is what it is. It wouldn't be the real price to get a turbo fixed. It's just a couple bolts and a swap. So don't let this scare you. The engines are rock solid, and there are many 997.2s and 991s already with over 200,000 miles, running trouble-free. You see what I mean about the Porsche 992 being on the road for a very long time? You can't do the depreciation math with 12 or 24 months. It doesn't make any sense. As far as the life of the car, the Porsche 992 is gonna be on the road a long time. Many people say today the same thing that they used to say even when air-cooled 911s were new. These cars will not appreciate how the older generation Porsches do. This keeps happening over and over again. Realistically, the Porsche 911 992 is going to be on the streets for the next 50 years. And is going to go through a lot of up and downs regardless of the economy, because styles and tastes change. You've got to think long term, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. In the early 2000s, the Porsche 964 was selling in the teens, and I remember that they were very difficult to sell. Everybody saw them as old and almost irrelevant. Look at it now. It has become, to many, the ultimate Porsche to have, and the prices totally match it. The Porsche 996 for many years sold for below average because of its headlights, but now the headlights are retro cool. The Porsche 996 now is where the Porsche 964 was in the early 2000s, underappreciated. Time to snap those up. Can the Porsche 992 ever be collectible, considering that there are so many of them being made? It's a simple yes, and it's all about the demographics. More people know about the Porsche 911 now than they did when I was younger. When the Porsche 993 came out, I knew about it because I was obsessed with cars, but most people did not know what it was. Even the kids in my high school didn't know what it was, and they had no way of finding out what it was. But today, everybody knows what a Porsche 911 is. That means your aunt, your dad, your brother, even your abuelita knows what a Porsche 911 is. So the demand is increasing relative to the cars being made. That's why Porsche has taken the 911 more upmarket, because it can. And the fact that it stays relatively the same means that brand awareness keeps going up. So it's got time on its side. And this doesn't happen with Ferraris and McLarens, that they're constantly changing. The broader market really doesn't know what they're looking at when they see one of them. They might think it's a Corvette. So Porsche charges supercar money because more people know. There's also more Porsche events all around the world than there are of any other make, Ferrari included. This means that when you purchase a Porsche 911 992, you're actually buying into a community of really cool people that are down to earth and just love cars. And it's all about branding. They even built a tower here in Miami. Too much? Well, that branding is what's gonna guarantee that any Porsche 911 992 that you purchase will have an ultimate resale value versus any other car that you could purchase in its price range. Porsche really knows what they're doing, especially these past 20 years. So will you like the Porsche 992 in a year after you've purchased it? Yes. This is the last of the old school Porsches. This is the ultimate air-cooled 911s for a lot of people around the world. This is the Porsche 964, and this is the Porsche that a lot of people still don't understand. Why is it so popular? Why have the prices escalated? And will you get burned if you buy one? Let's find out. Now, this is one of my favorite Porsches of all time. Just enough of old air-cooled feel with enough modern conveniences to be able to drive it every single day, so that it doesn't collect dust in the garage. And maybe it's perfect for you too. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help push this video out to more people around the world, so that more people can know about how good the Porsche 964 is. Growing up, the Porsche 964 to me was one of the coolest Porsches that I ever saw on the road. And it's incredible how much Porsches have changed since the 964. Before, seeing a Porsche on the road, even here in Miami, was an event. People will stop you at gas stations to ask you about the car. You will get a lot of looks as you're driving by. Now, that was back in the day when these cars were new. Now it's amplified even more. Let's just say if you like driving incognito, stay away from the Porsche 964. This car draws a crowd wherever it goes, and it's not just about looks. This is a bank vault on wheels, and more than bank vault, because there's a lot of cars that feel solid but they're big. The Porsche 964, being one of the last old school Porsches, has a level of concentrated mass that adds to its specialness. Nothing feels like an old school classic 911, but the Porsche 964 964 is not old school. You see, that car was significantly changed from the earlier year 911, but it's more than just extra comfort that this car has versus the earlier one. Now, if you're like me, you love Porsche 964s, but are they worth all this hype? How popular is the Porsche 964 exactly? I can give you an example. If a Porsche 964 is for sale here in Miami, it's not going to be a local sale. Chances are that car is leaving Miami and it's going to Dubai, somewhere in California, or some exotic location all around the world. So sales of Porsche 964s are usually not local sales. The buyers for Porsche 964s typically don't shop around their area. And so this is driving up the prices in ways that could not have been predicted 20 years ago. The good thing about the Porsche 964 is that if you're looking at these prices and thinking to yourself, well, I had a poster of this car as a kid, I'm scared if I buy it, it's not going to be as good as what I think it's going to be. If you've never driven a Porsche 964, let me tell you, that's not a concern with these cars. Most people are incredibly surprised of the disconnect about how they think the car is versus how it actually is. You see, if you've only seen this car on a poster, on pictures, and never actually driven it, you're going to be really surprised. It feels and drives a lot better than what you would imagine. And of course, if you do, you've got the air-cooled 911 bug, and you know it's going to be expensive. But how expensive? Well, there are some things that you can't get away from. The purchase price. Luckily, with the way the market is on these cars, and it's not just a local market, it's a worldwide market, the chances of losing your shirt on a Porsche 964, it's very rare. So you can buy it, enjoy it for a couple years, and then sell it for the same or more. What you don't want to do is buy a car that you think it's perfect, but turns out that it needs a lot of work, a lot of expensive work, because nothing is cheap in this car. So let's dig into what to look for when you're looking to purchase a Porsche 964, or if you actually have one parked in your driveway, there's no way around it. You need to know what you need to know about this car. So let's dive in. Now, when you're looking at the Porsche 964 market, you're actually stepping into an alternate reality. You see, no car that I've seen is stripped apart faster and over restored than a Porsche 964. So the owners are very meticulous about restorations and originality, not counting, of course, the updates and the backdate and all of these subcategories. So if the body happens to need restoration, believe me, you can definitely find somebody to do an entire nut and bolt restoration on a 964. It's done all the time. However, it's very expensive and time consuming. You can easily spend 2 years getting it right. If that's not you, then pay attention to this. The Porsche 964's body is fully galvanized. However, that does not guarantee that this car is rust free. Since the Porsche 964 begs to go to the track, a lot have been taken to the track many times. And many times, I mean just once a month or twice a month. But you add years to that and the possibility of any 964 getting in a small fender bender, the odds are increased exponentially. This means that looking for rust or bubbling in the paint is hugely important if you don't want to do an entire restoration. So you should see no rust anywhere on the body except a few areas that I give a pass to, because it affects a lot of them and they haven't been crashed, specifically around the windshield, since the glass is not bonded to the chassis. As the seal shrinks, water seeps in and just chills in the little crevices around the outside. Rust starts forming in these areas very quickly. I know cars that have had this repaired 2 or 3 times already. It's a relatively straightforward fix. However, if you don't address it, the rust most definitely will spread. So if you're looking to buy a Porsche 964 and you see rust, definitely budget that in. But also remember that if you see rust around these areas, that's usually not a sign of neglect. It just happens with these cars. Now, however, there is one asterisk to add to this. If you're looking to get a 964 RS, that's a beast of a car, right? Well, that car is special, not just in the way that it drives or that the body is seam welded. No, the rust proofing was almost completely eliminated from the factory. So these are far more likely to rust if you don't baby them. And what I mean baby as in garage, drive, right back to garage. So much so that Porsche cut down the corrosion warranty from 10 years down to 3 years on the RS models. They obviously know something that you should also. Be very careful with the RSs, check them extra well. And if you're fortunate enough to have one of these beautiful cars parked in your home, don't even park it on wet grass for extended amount of time. The wet grass is not good. On to the next point. A lot of these cars live parked. Now you think to yourself, how can anybody enjoy a parked car? Well, let me tell you that I do. Just looking at a parked car for me is enjoyable. So these are not abandoned cars. It's just cars that are not as driven as much. And what happens when you don't really drive a Porsche 964? I will say specifically anything over 24 months, the brake calipers start seizing up with the quickness. And again, this is not a sign of neglect. This is just a sign of non-use. And if there's moisture in the air, the calipers can seize up so much that they will need a full rebuild. I wouldn't hold this against any car because it's been parked. However, you've got to budget that in. The calipers are aluminum. The stainless steel thrust plates collect dust and road salt or air salt, and that can lead to some serious corrosion that you don't immediately see 2-3 months after you've driven the car. It takes a couple months for this to really start seizing up the calipers. From my experience, 24 months a car parked here in Miami, I'm pulling wheels. Check the brakes because the brakes seizing is one of the biggest things that happens with these cars that are purchased and not really driven that much. The suspension, on the other hand, they last a long time. 100,000 miles and you still won't get clicks or clunks in this suspension. So that's a lot easier to diagnose. A dragging brake caliper is to be expected. I wouldn't hold it against the car, I would just budget it in. On to the next point. When you're looking to buy any Porsche 964, the most common advice that you usually hear is check the record. And I agree with this. I like to see a stack of records going all the way back to when the car first came out of the dealership. However, the records on the 964s might not be 100% accurate. What do I mean? The speedometer gauge pulls right out. And so, yeah, I'm not going so much for the miles. I mean, you can, and it's good as far as the history and the value of the car. You know, you've got your Carfax, you've got all of that. And so you're going to have a natural progression of miles. Like, for example, I've seen many cars with 30,000 miles and they have seats like this, and I could just tell by the sag that that car easily has over 150,000 miles. So you actually have to go by the condition of the car. And since when you're looking to buy a Porsche 964, chances are it's not going to be in your local area. You might be 1,000 or 3,000 miles away. It gets really tricky. Ideally, you have a stack of records, you have a phone number of the latest shop that serviced the car. You can call the shop, and if the shop remembers and knows the car, that's as good as gold. Remember that. However, that's not always a possibility. So in cases like this, where you really don't know the car, you really don't know the seller, there's actually services of Porsche enthusiasts that will fly to the car, inspect the car for you for a fee, and give you a report. Tag somebody in the comments below if you know anybody. Now, this might seem extreme, but having a Porsche 964 expert look at the car is worth more than 10 PPIs. Let me explain. Yes, it might be a little bit expensive relative to a regular pre-purchase inspection, but if you just factor in the price of a headlight or respraying a rear bumper or any little thing on this car done right, you've more than covered yourself by sending an expert in there that really knows what they're looking at to look at your potential Porsche 964. Believe me, it's worth it. I've seen people buy perfect Porsche 964s only to have them delivered back to their home and the project start. Don't do that. Get informed, or find somebody that really knows Porsche 964s and have them inspect the car for you. The records are nice, however, they're not the end all and be all by a huge stretch. On to the next point. Engines. The Porsche 964's 3.6 liter air-cooled flat 6 is an unbelievable symphony of sound. Now, if you're really picky about sound, this car is like the full meal, especially with exhaust. However, it's not perfect. I remember all the way back in the 1990s when I got my first Porsche, me and my brother would go to local shops here in Miami and dig the owner's brains about these cars. My brother's an engineer, so a lot of the things came naturally to him, not to me as much. But there is one thing that was an overwhelming response to the Porsche 964s. They drive great, they're really fun, and they leak oil. As a matter of fact, if it's not leaking oil, chances are it doesn't have oil. And that's just part of it. A lot of the tiny microscopic oil leaks are actually hidden by the undertrays. These undertrays hide a lot of potential leaks. So the only real way to trace oil leaks is to put it on a lift, just like every single air-cooled 911. And on a lift, you can really diagnose if you have a potential oil leak. However, this car is gonna leak oil, and it's okay. It's not a big deal. The engines are really robust, and they take a pounding. Now, leaking oil and consuming oil are two totally different things. But guess what? These 3.6 engines also consume oil. As a matter of fact, Porsche has in their guidelines an allowable amount of oil usage that the air-cooled 3.6 engines are allowed. It being a flat 6 engine, if a car has been parked for a while, when you first turn around in the morning, you might get a beautiful plume of white smoke that signifies, oh no, it's burning oil. It's not. If you just get it on the startup and it clears out, that's natural. However, if you keep getting that beautiful white smoke, then chances are it needs a bit more looking into. When the Porsche 964 came out, Porsche did not use gaskets between the cylinders and the cylinder head. They instead used metal to metal contact. And when these heads are torqued down, you know distortion is going to happen. And if distortion happens, leaks happen. And if the distortion is enough, you're going to lose compression. The reduction of compression is the one thing that I would really watch out for. Even in 1990, Porsche put a larger seating surface and seating ring. To a lot of people, cured the problem. However, it did not go away. A lot of cars have been retrofitted, but the leaks are there. It's just part of the deal. Also, it's important to know that oil leaks can come from anywhere in the engine, and they often do. But in most cases, they're relatively small. The thing is that they just add all up. And if you've got to pull the engine to fix a little oil leak, believe me, you're not looking at a bill of changing a small oil leak, because once the engine is out, you might as well do everything that needs to be done to the 911. And usually the list is long. So a little bit of oil leaking is normal, however, not to the point where the car is actually losing compression. So checking the compression on all cylinders is the first thing to check on a Porsche 964's flat 6 engine. That will tell you the real health of the engine. So if you want to avoid that situation, make sure the car is truly inspected by somebody that knows air-cooled 911. Otherwise, the car is going to be out of the road in the shop getting refreshed for quite a while. The other thing that I would check for is the dual distributors. If they're both firing, you see, because there are 2 spark plugs per cylinder and it's got 2 distributors linked and thus synchronized by a toothed rubber belt. This belt can break, leading to just 1 plug per cylinder firing. And you know what? You can't always tell. Yes, it can make it feel uneven or have flat spots in the RPM range, but I know somebody that was driving around with a broken belt for over 2 years and did not notice. As far as they're concerned, their car was driving as good as new. That's not good. This obviously can lead to pre-detonation, and that means blown cylinder head seals, or worse. That's also an easy check that's not immediately obvious from any test drive, unless somebody that really knows his cars is driving it. On to the next point, the dual mass flywheel on the manuals. It actually makes it really smooth. Think of it as rubber in the flywheel. And that's exactly what it is. So this time in Porsche's history, Porsche was trying to make their cars smoother and quieter. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons that the 996 came out. The CEO at the time thought that nobody was going to pay more money for cars that were really loud and not as refined. So in this quest to really refine the Porsche 964s, they added this dual mass flywheel with a rubber dampener. And like anything rubber, it first starts getting hard, it starts cracking, and then ironically, after not much abuse, you actually have a car that's clunking far more than a car than it just had a normal flywheel. If you got to change the flywheel, you can't do it with the engine inside. So that means that if you can't do it yourself, you've got to pay for the labor to go ahead and drop the engine to change out the clutch and flywheel. A lot of people go with the lightweight RS flywheels, which I personally like, because it makes the engine rev a lot faster, in a way a lot smoother as you're accelerating through the gears, but not smooth as in heavy smooth. I mean smooth as in eager smoothness, and that's what the lightweight flywheel gives you. The engine feels stronger, and to me, the engine feels like it's picked up an easy 30-40 horsepower. Feel at the end of the day is all that matters, at least to me. On to the next point, the Tiptronic transmission. Now, the Tiptronic transmission is a torque converter transmission, so it's a conventional transmission, and guess what? It's great. It really is. It's not as engaging as the manuals, but if you would read the test drives on this transmission back in the day, everyone was like, wow, this transmission really takes a 964 to the next level. Now, of course, the driving enjoyment is not the same as the manuals. However, just driving an air-cooled 911 is enough for a lot of people. Believe me, it really is. So the automatic transmissions, them being great, they're also very reliable, and they don't sap that much fun from the 964. So no bashing of the automatic, because you know what? One day, every single one of us is gonna get to the point where we really can't be shifting as much, and just the fact that you have the option of getting an automatic to enjoy an air-cooled 911 is incredible. For a lot of people, it's the automatic or nothing. It's good, and nobody should knock it. On to the next point, buying modified cars. Now, I understand that modifying is half the fun for a lot of people. However, when the time comes to sell, when somebody's looking to buy a Porsche 964, they're looking at the poster. This is what they have in their brain right here. This is it. Anything that deviates from this, the value, you know, I don't want to say the value, because there's always a buyer for the car. Let's just say the pool of buyers is far less, because you could have a really cool car, but it might be cool to some people, but not other people. So this is something that most people that have owned many Porsches know, that whenever you even change the radio from the original Porsche unit, when you do that, you'll get better sound, better everything. However, when the time comes to sell, the buyer's not thinking, wow, great music. The buyer is thinking, what happened to the wiring? What's going on inside there? Thinking about the liability, of course. So if you're looking to sell, original is 100 times better than modified. If you're looking to buy, remember that what I'm saying here is obvious to a lot of people, and you're always going to pay a premium for originality. However, a lot of cars look original, but they're not. They were modified, brought back to original, and modified yet again. This means that you really need to have an expert take a look at the car because it might look beautiful in pictures. However, in person, you can tell it's been fooled around with, and only the eye of somebody that obsesses over these cars can really tell in 10 seconds. So if you can find somebody that really knows these cars to take a look at them to see if they're really original, that's worth its price in gold. On to the next one. If you live in hot places like Miami, all you really care about is the AC gonna cool? Are you gonna be sweating your butts off? Or are you actually gonna be able to drive it and not arrive drenched? One of the great things about Porsche 964s is that those are actually the ones that you see in Miami because it's hot and the air conditioner works. You rarely see any air-cooled 911s here in Miami unless they're 964 and up. And the main reason is AC. AC down here is like it's like life support, especially when it gets really hot in traffic when there is no breeze. So to get the benefit of the 964's completely revised HVAC system, it needs to be R12. If you follow advice from magazines like this and go with the R134, it's just not going to cool as good. Specifically the cool down time. You're going to be in there sweating until it starts cooling down little by little, and you're just going to be like, this is not good. This revised AC systems in the 964 was designed to run R12, not R134. The cooling is going to go way down, and this is super important not just for hot weather, because the compressor should also be on when you're turning on the heater, because the compressor dries the air inside the cabin. So whenever you see conversion kits that say, oh, this kit converts your R12 to 134, all that is just a little cap so you could put the new gas in. Nothing's been converted. It's a R12 system. So if you want to have a good time with your 964, take it on road trips for thousands of miles and arrive in comfort as it was designed to do in the 964, R12, it's where it's at. You can still buy it. The only thing with the R12 is that they just don't make it anymore. But guess what? They made so much of it that it's still available to purchase. On to the next one. So the Porsche 964 being a really emotional car, if you're going into it clear-headed and knowing exactly what you're getting, you ensure that your emotions with this car is 100% positive. As a matter of fact, it might be the one car that you really want to keep forever. However, on the flip side, if you have a bad experience because you didn't do your due diligence and had a solid pre-purchase inspection, it can turn sour really quickly. And from what I've seen, most of the bad experiences that people have with Porsche 964s are from people that have gotten cars that have been neglected, that have years of deferred maintenance, and they think it's going to be perfect. It's not. It's gonna have issues. This was an expensive car when it was new, and it's even more expensive now. But the good thing is that whatever you spend on most air-cooled 911s, usually when the time comes to sell, you're able to get your money back. If you do sell, because usually when people buy a Porsche 964, it's the one they keep. Because there are few cars that are better in the driveway than in the poster. And the Porsche 964 is definitely one of them. That's the Porsche 964. Used 993s regularly sell for over $100,000. More are selling for more than they did when they first came out into the showroom. It looks expensive to anybody who doesn't understand what the air-cooled 911 market is. When Porsche finished making the 993, they didn't replace that car. The 993 is the last 911. So it's the last, not just air-cooled, because when you say it was the last air-cooled, you're only talking about the engine. No, the entire car is the last of that era, and it was never replaced. All that moved from that era to the new era is the badge and the naming for marketing purposes. There is no a latest and greatest, because that is the latest and greatest. So since the car was never replaced, everybody wants them. There is no comparable, and that's driving up prices. The 993 in particular is very interesting. When you say market forces drive up a car's price, you can say that just about any used car that has gone up in value. The air-cooled 911s are different in that the demand is a recognition of the value that you get with those cars. Let me explain. Whenever you see supply-demand arguments used to describe a car's astronomical price going up, it's usually forces that are external. There are a lot of classic cars that have gone up in value because of external forces. Pop culture, a movie or several movies, all of these external forces can get the car and raise its value regardless of the quality of the car. And that happens a lot. You see that everywhere in the used car market. The reason that the 993 and air-cooled 911s, but specifically the 993, are going going up is because there was no replacement for that car. That was the last of the last. There was no cool movie that made its price go double. No, it has gone up because of the car and only the car. Now, what do you mean the car? Well, it's very interesting with this car. Porsche in the early 90s was about to go bankrupt, building cars like the 993 and the 928. So it cost them more money to build the car and get it to the showroom than what the car was actually selling for. They were counting on variations and upsales in the options. Now, a lot of manufacturers do this, but the 911 was Porsche's bread and butter. By doing this with your main car, you are at the line of break even or make profit. And even when you do make money on the turbos, on the higher end spec cars, it's not a breakout profit. So this was Porsche's situation all through the 80s and the 90s. So much so that they almost went bankrupt, building cars that are more expensive to make than what you're selling them for. And that all changed with the Boxster. The Boxster came in at just under 40,000 bucks in 1997, and the profit margin in the Boxster was over 50% for Porsche. Now they're in business. The end user was getting a Porsche experience for less money than the 911. So you can't keep a running company selling a product that you're losing money on. And so they came out with the Boxster, and it saved Porsche from going bankrupt. And when the new 911 came out after the 993, it only cost Porsche about 18% more to make a 911 versus the Boxster. But they were selling them at 911 prices, plus options, of course. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that you have two cars, the 993 that Porsche was losing money on, and the Boxster, which was a huge moneymaker, and the 996. So Porsche went from almost being bankrupt to being the most profitable car company in the world, with margins that are astronomical. As a matter of fact, they still are. But after the dust has settled, all that you're left with is the cars, the actual product that was left by this switch from the old to the new. And when you hold the product on itself, one was a moneymaker for Porsche and one lost money for Porsche. So now you can start seeing why the 993 is going up so much in value. You get more for your money with that car. Even if you're paying over as new, over sticker on a car that's almost 30 years old, you're still getting more for your money than a newer 911. And you couldn't tell this from the road tests at the time. All the road tests that came out at the time were glowing praises for the new replacement. A hair faster, a little bit quieter, stops a little bit better. So the figures looked like if it was an upgrade. And all it takes is just opening the door of a 993. I can do a 2-hour video about the 911's door. But there are also a whole bunch of other little things that are not as obvious as that bank vault door that car has. Little things like the carpet. The carpet on the 993 is sliver knit from the factory. It's almost like a lamb's wool. And like that, everything throughout the car, the seat structures, you remove the base of the seat on the 993 is the same one as the 928. Made by Recaro, it is overbuilt and expensive to make. So how does that hold up over time? You get in a 993 that has 100,000 miles and you cannot tell that that car has that many miles. It could have 200,000 miles and is still in unbelievable condition because it holds up, because Porsche was losing money in that car. Bad for Porsche, but it was great for the customer. Now, since that car is gone, they don't make it anymore. The good thing is that you can still buy one, and they're so overbuilt that it doesn't matter if it's almost 30 years old. It's as good as new. It is that impressive. Now people know what those cars are, and they all want a little bit of 993, and I can't blame them. The 993 is the most beautiful car that has ever been made, period. It's so beautiful that Porsche has been trying to get back to that 993 look with every model, starting with the 997. The 997 looks more like a 993, the 991, even the new 992 has standard wide body that you should have to pay extra for. Very difficult in a new car with crash regulations, so the car keeps getting bigger and bigger, but not quite as beautiful as the 993. Now, the car is not only about build quality or looks, however, it is a big factor. What makes the 993 so cool is that it's a 1960s car and it ended in the 993. You can get a door from a 1997 Porsche 993 and put it on a 1975 Porsche 911. It bolts on. Incredible. So even though the structure is the same, it was stiffened, refined. The suspension was completely redone several times, especially for the 993 up from the 964. The engine kept getting bigger and bigger, but it kept a lot of weird things. So if you got floor hinged pedals like an old Beetle. It's funny. And since you're driving a 1960s car with modern Porsche performance, you still have the big Brembo brakes, you still have that flat 6 engine, you still have that 6-speed, you have modern air conditioner so you can actually drive it in hot places, like for example here in Miami. You can daily drive that car and be entertained all the time. That's part of the reason why those cars are so expensive. You can use them every single day. You don't have to use them only on the weekends. The maintenance on that car is very low, especially compared to the earlier air-cooled 911s. There's no valve adjustments. Remember, it's decades of refinement in that 993 engine, and the brakes are almost comical, more than sufficient for that car. And it's got a 6-speed, but 6 is actually an acceleration gear because that car does top end in 6th gear, not 5th. So 6 is not an overdrive. You have 6 usable gears. Now, since Porsche was counting on making money on variations of the car and selling them for more, countless variation of that car came out. All-wheel drive, convertibles, Targa, turbo, wide body. Add to that the list of options that you could have had, any color, anything, as long as you paid for it. That's how Porsche stayed afloat with the 993. And that's great for the customer because there's so many versions of the 993 that there's something for everybody. But the nicest ones, you're gonna pay the most for. 993 turbos, you're gonna pay. 993 wide bodies, you're also gonna pay. And the only deals that you can possibly find on a 993 are gonna be the convertibles and some of the Targas, because the Targas are still super nice. And that's to be understood because that all comes down to where you live. If you live in Miami, having a 993 convertible is 365 day a year experience. It's heaven. But if you have it in Michigan where it snows, that heaven becomes a liability and it limits the use of the car. Remember, these cars are daily drivers. If you have to store the car, you're storing the fun, and obviously the price goes down. The prices relative to other Porsches have stayed going up constantly, except for one initial dip when the Boxster and the 996 came out. When those cars came out, the marketing on the newer water-cooled cars was overwhelming, and the used prices, especially on the basic 993s, went down and stayed lower for a couple of years. I remember in the early 2000s, you can get a 993s in the teens. That doesn't exist today. That was all the marketing that Porsche was pushing out with the newer cars. It suppressed the market, but obviously the cream has to rise to the top anyways. And except for that initial dip that maybe lasted 3-4 years, the prices started going up. They might stall for a couple of years and then back up again. That's that car's market, and I don't see that changing. The car is not a marketing car. The car is the real deal. Whatever you spend on that car, your money's secure. So it's expensive, but relative to what? You could spend $45,000 on a new minivan, and in 5 years you can't even give it away. On a 993, you could spend $80,000, $100,000, enjoy the car for a couple years, and then sell it for the same or more. And if anything, that trend is gonna accelerate because it's a usable investment. Not only the most beautiful car ever made, it is the best investment regardless of price because you get to enjoy it as it stays or goes up in value. And you can say that about all air-cooled 911s, but the 993 in particular. Now you know.